As Prime Minister Justin Trudeau makes his first official visit to China, he is being urged to make human rights a priority. This morning, Trudeau spoke about Kevin Garrett, the Canadian missionary who was charged with espionage last January and is being held in prison in China.
I have highlighted a number of consular cases, including the Kevin Garrett case, and I continue to look forward to collaborating closely on these issues and on many issues that are important to Canadians and to citizens of China.
Well, balancing economic talks with discussions of human rights is always a delicate task. And joining me now is David Mulroney, president of University of St. Michael's College and former Canadian ambassador to China, also no relation. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for coming in. Let's talk about some of the human rights issues that the group called the Canadian Coalition for Human Rights in China has brought up. They want the Prime Minister to reference China's massive crackdown on human rights defenders, as they say. So what's the current issue? What's the current situation with that issue?
What's happening is the current Chinese president, Xi Jinping, who is very much more than a first among equals, he's the boss in China, has been cracking down in a number of sectors, including on those very courageous Chinese lawyers who defend human rights cases. So that's an issue that everybody who's concerned about the rule of law and human rights should raise, and I'm sure that this has come up and will come up in any Canadian discussion with China. They've
also highlighted the press for freedom for he wants the Prime Minister to press for freedom for 13 prisoners, Can the Prime Minister even make headway during a meeting like this, during a trip like this?
Well, you know, the human rights file is broad and has a lot of aspects, unfortunately, because there are a lot of problems in China. Traditionally, prime ministers raise a number of key issues. They give a list of names of prisoners that we'd like to see released, we'd like to see have better treatment. And that's something we often talk about with like-minded countries like the Americans or the Australians or others. So it's an important thing to do, and I'm sure it's part of this visit.
Now, they've also said torture is widespread and systematic in the country. So what is happening there?
That's really a result of the lack of respect for rule of law. And China's a big country, very hard to govern. And in many cases, Chinese police and security officials overstep the bounds, torture, abuse prisoners. So that, again, is something. But you address it a number of ways. You address it by raising it at the level of leaders, but you can also do things like training programs, exchanges with police to show them how police in other jurisdictions operate. Because often, at some level, they want to be like the best.
Well, let's talk about tone and tactic in being efficient and coming home with results. You have said that the best way of proceeding would be to nudge, push, and edge the issue towards a positive outcome rather than pounding your fist on the table in public. Have you seen what sort of tactics the Prime Minister is looking to use? Is he going to be a nudging kind of person?
The problem is that China is a political country just as Canada is, and the Chinese premier and the Chinese president have their own constituencies they have to answer to. So if it looks like you're backing them up into a corner, they will push back. You have to find a tone, because your objective is not to scold the Chinese, but to get better treatment for Canadians and ultimately for their release and to help Chinese prisoners. So tone is very important, and I think he's so far struck the right tone.
But business interests are also at play here. This is a massive trading partner, the biggest market in the world. They are our second biggest trading partner, but a vast difference between our massive trade with the United States, much, much smaller with China. So the potential for growth is huge there. And we have a few cards that we can play ourselves. We've got China wants us to be involved in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, as well as opening up foreign investment in the oil sands. So how do you think those files are going to be at play in China on this trip?
Well, the interesting thing is, as you say, Ben, China's not the market that the U.S. is. But what Canadians often don't realize is it's much, much bigger than our other traditional markets like the U.K. and Japan and Germany. So it's this significant second partner. And the interesting thing is that the Chinese are interested in a lot of what Canada has to offer. Traditional things like our resources and our agricultural products. But what's really kind of interesting is the Chinese people themselves have more money. They can travel. China's now the #1 tourism country in the world, so it sends more tourists than any other country. And a lot of them are coming to places like Vancouver and Toronto and the Rocky Mountains. A third of our international students come from China. And as we've seen, newly prosperous Chinese people are often looking for a second address, and that means buying a condo in Vancouver or Toronto. So there's this people-to-people dimension of the relationship that's important too.
Now, when you look at us back home, what does it say to you that a poll recently came out that said more than half of Canadians polled said that they'd be willing to take a hit financially if it meant not dealing with an Asian partner who does have problems with human rights?
This gets to the very heart of the challenge facing the Prime Minister when he comes home. The most, I think, difficult part of this visit is the aftermath, when the Prime Minister has to explain to Canadians who are justifiably skeptical about China. There's a lot about China that's hard to like right now. It's assertive, as you've mentioned, it's cracking down on human rights. The point, though, is the world is changing, and China is now a major military power, it's a major political power, a major economic power, and we have to find a way of living alongside them. That doesn't mean agreeing with them or not talking about difficult subjects, but it means having a regular exchange with them.
The issue of Canadian canola, check the box there for the Prime Minister. Open to free trade, check that box. Do you think he's going to be able to check the box on advances in human rights before he comes home from this trip?
That's a tougher file, but what he's already done is he's started a conversation. So human rights involves his conversation. I'd also like to see some smart Canadian programming where we're working with disadvantaged people in Tibet, with migrant workers, many of them women in China. There are a lot of things that we can do to nudge that forward.
David Mulroney, former ambassador to China, thank you very much for being here this morning on Your Morning.
It's a real pleasure, Ben. Thank you.
And Trudeau will be busy the rest of this week with business-related meetings. He is making stops in Beijing, Shanghai, and also Hong Kong. And he'll attend the G20 summit in Hangzhou, which takes place September 4th and 5th. And we will be back. We will be back in just 1 minute.